I think that's it. Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may happen to be, whatever time it may happen to be, whatever year it may happen to be. We are a full service, so we don't care. We don't care if you're living in 2022 or in 1942. It's all okay. It's all good. I'm Tad. I'm going to be reading some tonight. As usual, we're going to be dealing with we're at the ragged frontier of knowledge here as far as how to make all these things work properly. I still haven't changed computers yet, so whatever problems are inherent in the system because of the older computer are still going to be inherent in the system. So you're welcome to let me know. There won't be much I can do about it tonight. I hope everything will be okay. The sound will be decent. We won't have any weird, sudden disappearances in the midst of the broadcast of the signal, which I think last night may have just been something to do with the, I don't know, didn't move the cursor and it kicked in the screensaver or something. But anyway, so that's what's going on as far as the technical aspects of things. As far as the non-technical aspects of things, God only knows. Just another week of work, working on the book, struggling still with the wrist stuff and other related inflammatory issues. But that's boring. I don't want to talk about that, so we won't talk about it. But there's not a heck of a lot else to talk about because that's really all I've been doing is either working or writhing in pain. One of the two. Um, Everybody's well here. My wife was away last night, as I mentioned when I was doing the reading last night, but she has returned safely and had a nice time with our friend. And that's all good. Kids are here. Kids are well. Various and sundry animals, all well. Cat has gone back to bed, having had her dinner. The dogs were last I saw, were canvassing heavily for their meal, but they are fed by our oldest child, and sometimes it takes a while to get him to respond. So you know how smart animals are. You know, they figure these things out. So they discovered that they could sit in his room, the person who actually feeds them. They could sit in his room and whine and bark and wag and do everything possible to get his attention. But if he's playing a game or something, he will literally not even see them. So what they've figured out that they need to do is they come running in about 5 minutes past feeding time, sometimes considerably earlier, but no later than 5 minutes past their normal feeding time if they have not been fed, which is almost always. And they jump around on top of Deb and I, who are at that point probably, reclined on the bed reading or watching something or whatever, and they'll like leap up and down on us and bounce on us and nuzzle us and try to look really charming and cute and at the same time that they're within moments of death by starvation, because they know that eventually we will get up in a high dudgeon, which I've never even seen a dudgeon, so I don't know what the difference is between a high dudgeon and the regular low altitude dudgeon, but we will get up in a high dudgeon or in a state of pique and go and demand that our son feed the animals because they're driving us crazy. So they've learned, they have trained us, is essentially what has happened. And that was what was going on tonight when I came down to prep for this stuff. So, anything else to talk about? Not really. As I said, it's been, as I'm always saying, actually, most of the time, it's just a process of work at the moment. And when I have the ability and the wherewithal, I will work. And the rest of the time, I am recovering from work and then going back to work again. And I don't really think there's a whole lot else to describe. I wish I had more exciting things. We were just talking about they've got a new deep sea exhibit at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which, if you've never been there, is a wonderful aquarium. And it's probably the nicest local aquarium in the sense that it is very much focused on the local Pacific coastline where it stands and incorporates, a gigantic kelp tank. And there's actually a part of the aquarium that you're literally looking out into the bay, the Monterey Bay, and it features a lot of animals that are native to this area and things like that. And it's just a beautifully constructed aquarium. And we haven't been there for at least a year or two, probably more actually, now that I think about it. I keep forgetting about the pandemic, which basically just took a big bite out of most of 2 years. So I'd have to go back before the pandemic, which means it's probably been more like 4 years. But anyway, so we're talking about going to do that, but we haven't, so I can't report it. I can't give you an interesting update on what the moon jellies looked like or anything. However, what I can say is that both the jellyfish exhibit and the otter exhibit, the sea otter exhibit at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, both have live camera feeds. So if you get bored during the time of day when the otters might be up, you can always tune in and see what the otters are doing. The jellyfish are pretty much always the same. The otters, obviously being mammalian, are much more active during the daytime and much more interesting to watch. The jellyfish, they're just jellyfishing around. But they're beautiful. They're quite beautiful. And it's mesmerizing to just put it on the television screen or wherever you watch, YouTube or whatever it is, or your computer screen, and just watch the jellyfish just flowing and moving around and just jellyfishing. So anyway, that's basically what's going on here. I will see if people are hearing me. Yes, they seem to be. So that's all good. Excuse me, I'm going to check in real quickly and say hello to people and see how everybody's doing. First off is Medardo. And Medardo, of course, his full name, Medardo Landon Mazadueñas. And hello. Good to see you, Medardo. Claudia, hello, hello. Good evening. Mr. You next. That's Jerry. And who else have we got here? Justin. Hello, Justin. Good to see you. Welcome aboard. Jarrett. Hello, hello. Yes, all is well in Tadland. It's all a bit boring in Tadland at the moment, it's in the sense that it's just all work right now. Work and anti-inflammatories. But no real complaints. Becca. Hello. Good evening to you. Good to see you. Tim. Hello, hello. Yes, we have had good weeks here as far as I know. Everybody is pursuing their own things and getting ready for various things. So yes. Barb Ann says, hi, sorry I wasn't here live last Sunday, but your daughter got married. Well, what a terrible excuse. I mean, come on. I mean, that happens all the time. No, don't be silly. Of course, what a wonderful thing. Congratulations to you and happy matrimony to her and her partner. Presumably, most people still, despite the expansion of certain things these days, most people still get married to another person. And so happy marriage to her and her partner. And I hope you had a great time. Anyway, Emily, hello. Just got back to Detroit from a show in Cleveland and ready for stories. Excellent. I like both Detroit and Cleveland, actually. Neither of them are fashionable cities, but both of them are places where I've had a very nice time and met a lot of really cool people. And I'm also, being a sports guy, except for the several years in a row when LeBron James and the Cavaliers were playing my local Warriors every year in the NBA Finals, I almost always root for and the 1 year that the San Francisco Giants played the Detroit Tigers in the World Series, I almost always root for both Detroit and Cleveland sports teams because they've had some wretched luck in the last couple of decades, and I'm always a big supporter of the underdog team, unless they're playing my team, in which case I want to see them ground beneath the heels of justice. But the rest of the time, so I'm a fan. So anyway, so glad you're back in Detroit, and I'm glad you're ready for stories. Who else? Kristen, hello, Kristen. Kristen's one of the very most loyal listeners, watchers, whatever we call people who are on the other end of this strange exercise that I perform a couple times a week. Anyway, Kristen, good to see you, and I hope we do better with our tech tonight than we did last night. Cliff, hello, hello. Good at Chateau Winnig. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear you and your family are well. Margaret, hello. Good evening to you. Evan is looking forward to the end of the pandemic. Aren't we all, Evan? Aren't we all? Jeez. I mean, it hasn't been, as bad as certain people would make out, obviously, especially for people like us who work from home anyway. So I try not to complain. Because I've got it so much better than a lot of folks. I'm past the point in my life where I have to go out to the office and commute every day and all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, as I've said many times, we have at least one family member and my elderly parents who are, certainly in danger. And so we've been extra careful. And, it's at a certain point, you do kind of go like, I've been doing this for a couple of years now. I'm quite ready to do something else. So, yeah, we're all looking forward to that. Although God only knows what'll be next. Invasion by the robot people of Alpha 9 or something, it's just crisis to crisis. But that's okay. We'll deal with the robots when we need to deal with the robots. Mike, hello, Mike. Good to see you. Jeremy got kicked off of Facebook. Music directed and played piano this weekend. Excellent. A first live in-person musical since COVID struck. Oh, that is a nice feeling. I'm very glad to hear it, Jeremy. I'm glad you got to do that. And I'm sure the kids enjoyed it. Greg, hello. Good evening to you. James, hello. Good to see you too. And Chris, hello. Oh, you're a Detroit native. I'm not a Detroit native. My uncle, one of my uncles, my mom's sister's husband was a Detroit native. So I was exposed to some Detroit stuff early on. When I was a kid baseball fan, for instance, I was an Al Kaline fan, among other things. And then I was big behind the 1968 Detroit Tigers baseball team. Sorry about the Lions. That's hard luck on sports fans. Anyway, but as I said, I've always had very fond feelings about both Cleveland and Detroit sports. Anyway, and Kristen says that she was late to the party and didn't start watching till near the end of War of the Flowers. Well, it's still been quite a while, and you're one of those people who tends to see both ends of the thing instead of only seeing one of them and then watching the other one online or something. So that certainly doubles the amount that you've actually seen. Okay, so said hello to everybody who checked in, and let me think if there's anything else that needs to be discussed. No, working on Navigator's Children, mentioned that. Into the Narrow Dark comes out in July, but that's just about completely out of my hands now. In fact, as far as I know, it is completely out of my hands now. Trying to decide what might be working on next. Barban, who I had my conversation with earlier, asking about her daughter getting married, says yes, she married a human male. Well, hey, some of my best friends are human males. I'm not sure I'd let my daughter marry one, but I'm not prejudiced. Jay wants to know, how come your house looks nice? Oh, Jay, if that's either a comment based out of incredible naivete, or it is the sharpest kind of satire, because obviously all you have to do is look behind me and look at the clutter and crap in here, and that's the showiest and cleanest part of the room. The what's behind the computer you can't see here is just horrifying. Anyway, we live like animals. We do, but we are animals, right? We're all animals. I mean, let's get used to it, folks. We are animals. We are animals who wear clothes and who watch old episodes of Friends when we're really depressed and eat ice cream directly out of the carton. We are friends who, listen to Marvin Gaye records. We are animals, rather, who listen to Marvin Gaye records. We are animals who write books. We are animals who drive cars. But we're still animals, and that's okay. That's all right. As a matter of fact, it's important to remember that, because, when you when human beings constantly comparing themselves to deities or, whatever, angels, then we're always going to come off looking bad. But if we compare ourselves to like armadillos and stuff, we're not doing that badly. Nothing against armadillos, mind you. I like armadillos. But, when it comes to comfort, speed of travel, all kinds of things, we got it on armadillos. So that doesn't mean that we're better than armadillos, but it means we are doing some interesting, useful things. So there you go. I don't know what any of that meant, but it was pretty good for spur of the moment. Okay, so without further ado, I did give you my pitch on that, didn't I? About how that's one of Shakespeare's hidden puns. That this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. That famous bit from Hamlet is actually a pun because adieu means goodbye, means to God. That means goodbye in French, but it also literally means to God, adieu. So it's a pun because he's considering suicide. So Shakespeare's full of clever stuff like that. I only know about it because one of my clever teachers taught me back when I was a high school kid. And I went, ooh, you mean reading Shakespeare, there's actually stuff you have to find here. There's tricky stuff. Ooh, I like that. And that got me going, and then I wound up reading all of Shakespeare. And it's been a huge and important part of my mental and emotional life ever since. And he truly was a fabulous genius writer, although there were a lot of other good writers in his era as well that aren't quite as well remembered. Not just Marlowe, but Kidd and a variety of others. Anyway, so now we are going to continue. We are continuing with Otherland. We're about to start chapter 35, Lord of Temaloon. The only thing you really need to know at this point is that Rini and her party, consisting of her and Kabu and Martine, have made their way into Otherland and have been picked up in this city of Temaloon, this strange amalgam of many different eras, apparently, and many different cultures. And they have been conducted to the leader, the god king of the city of Temaloon, who has just announced himself as being Bolivar Atasco. The only thing we know about Bolivar Atasco is he's one of the people affiliated with the Grail Project. Then in the more recent chapter, Orlando and Fredericks also arrived in the Otherland network. And Orlando nearly died a couple of times because he's very sick in the real world, but it's affecting him, and he's fighting with pneumonia and other things. But at the very end, they too have been picked up by the agents of the God King. And that's where we were. So we're going to now start with chapter 35, Lord of Temaloon. Netfeed, news. Vat beef poisoning scare in Britain. Visual, mob outside Derbyshire factory. Voiceover. A rash of fatal illnesses in Britain has caused chaos in the cultured meat industry. One food project, Artiflesh Limited, has seen drivers attacked and a factory burned to the ground. Visual, salmonella bacteria under microscopic enlargement. The deaths are blamed on a salmonella infection of a beef mother, the original flesh matrix from which up to 100 generations of vat-grown meat can be derived. One such mother can be the source of thousands of tons of cultured meat. Atasco! Rini raised her hands to defend herself, but their captive only regarded her with faint irritation. You know my name? I am surprised. Why? Because we're just little people. Confronted with the first real face, as real as any sim could be, behind Otherland, she found she was not frightened. A cold anger filled her and made her feel she was standing apart from herself. No? Atasco seemed genuinely puzzled. Because I did not think my name was commonly known, at least outside of certain circles. Who are you? Rini reached out and touched Kabu on the shoulder, as much for her own comfort as his. If you don't know, I'm certainly not going to tell you. I've forgotten If you don't know, I'm certainly not going to tell you. The God King shook his head. You are a most impertinent young woman. Rini, Martine began, but at that moment something slithered at high speed across the floor of the council chamber, an iridescent blur that skirted Rini and Kabu by a matter of inches before disappearing into the shadows. Ah! As he followed the odd apparition with his gaze, the annoyance faded from Bolivar Atasco's face. There it is again. Do you know what that is? Rini could not gauge his tone. No. What? He shook his head. I haven't the slightest idea. Well, that is not exactly true. I have an idea of what it represents, but not what it is. It's a phenomenon of complexity, the immense complexity of the system. Not the first, and I dare say not the last or the strangest. He stood for a moment, pondering, then turned back to Rini and her friends. Perhaps we should cut this unsatisfying conversation short. There's still much to do. Torture? Rini knew she should keep quiet, but months of frustration and rage could not be ignored. She felt hardened and sharpened like a knife blade. Firebombing people's apartments and putting children into comas and beating old women to death not satisfying enough? Rini, Martine began again, but was interrupted by Atasco's angry shout. Enough! His eyes had narrowed to slits. Are you a madwoman? Who are you to come into my world and make such accusations? He turned to Martine. Are you her caretaker? If so, you have failed. The monkey has better manners. The monkey is perhaps more patient, Martine said quietly. Rini, Kabu, I think we may have made a mistake. A mistake? Rini was astonished. Perhaps Martine had developed some kind of amnesia because of her traumatic entry into this sim world. But she herself remembered Atasco's name only too well. In any case, she had only to look at the arrogant, aristocratic face that he had chosen to know everything about him. I don't think there's any mistake about him, except thinking that we'll be polite about this. Kabu clambered up onto one of the chairs, and from there onto the surface of the table. A question, Mr. Atasco. Why did you bring us here? He took in the talking monkey without comment. I did not bring you here. You brought yourselves here, I would assume. But why? Kabu persisted. You are the ruler of this fantastical place. Why are you spending time talking to us? What do you think that we want? Atasco raised an eyebrow. You have been summoned here. I have let the person who summoned you use my city, my palace, for the sake of convenience. Well, and because I share some of his fears. He shook his head as though it were all quite obvious. His high, feathered crown swayed. Why am I speaking to you? To our guests. It is courtesy, of course, something you seem able to do without. Are you saying... Rini had to stop for a moment to figure out just what he was saying. Are you saying that you haven't brought us here to hurt us or threaten us? That you don't have anything to do with my brother being in a coma? With the people who killed Dr. Susan Van Bleek? Atasco stared at her for a long moment. The handsome face was still imperially condescending, but she could sense a certain hesitation. If the terrible acts you describe can be laid at the doorstep of the Great Brotherhood, then I am not entirely without blame, he said at last. It is because I fear I may have unwittingly contributed to that evil that I have made my beloved Temelun available as a gathering place. But I am not personally responsible for the things you suggest, for the love of God, no. He turned to look across the broad room. Lord, these are odd times. Few strangers ever come here, and now there will be many. But this is a time of change, I suppose. He turned back. Do you know what tomorrow is? For movement. We inherited our dates from the Aztecs, you see, but that is a very significant day, the end of the fifth sun, the end of an age. Most of my people have forgotten the old superstitions, but of course that's because it's been 1,000 years in their time. Is he crazy? Rini wondered. I'm talking about people killed and crippled, and he's talking about Aztec calendars. But you said we were summoned. Kabu spread his long arms. Please, summoned by whom? You must wait for the others. I am the host, but I am not the one who has chosen you. Rini felt as though the world had abruptly reversed its spin. Were they just going to take this man's word for it that he was somehow on their side? If that were true, why all this vagueness? She picked at the knot, but could see no immediate solution. So that's all you can tell us, even though you're the big chief around here? She asked at last, earning a reproachful stare from Kabu. Atasco had not conquered his initial dislike, but he made an effort to answer her civilly. The one who called you has labored long and with great subtlety. Even I do not know everything he has done or thought. Rini frowned. She was not going to be able to make herself like the man, that seemed certain. He reminded her of some of the worst South African whites, the rich ones, subtle, secretive hair. He reminded her of some of the worst South African whites, the rich ones, subtle, secretive heirs of the Ancien Regime, who never had to assert their superiority because they just assumed it was obvious. But she had to admit to herself that she might have misjudged him. Okay, if I've been too quick to accuse, I apologize, she said. Please understand, if after the attacks we've survived, and then to find ourselves in this place, manhandled by police. Manhandled? Is this true? She shrugged. Not violently, but they certainly didn't make us think we were honored guests either. I would pass them a word. Gently, of course. They must have autonomy. If the God King speaks too harshly, the whole system becomes perturbed. Martine had been looking as though she wished to speak for some time. You have built this place, no? It is yours? Grown it would perhaps be closer to the mark. His chilly expression softened. You came in by bus, I understand. That is too bad. You did not see the splendid canals or the harbor. Would you like me to tell you something about Temilun? Yes, very much, Martine said hurriedly. But first, something else. I am having trouble filtering my input. The raw data is very strong. Could you? Is there a way you could adjust it? I am afraid it is rather too much for me. I should think so. He paused, but it was more than a pause. His body simply froze in place, with none of the small signs that a living but still human body shows. Kabu looked at Rini, who shrugged. She did not know what Atasco was doing, and wasn't quite sure what Martine was talking about either. Then, with no warning, Atasco's sim was alive again. It can be done, I believe, he said, but not easily. You are receiving the same quantity of information as the others, and since you are all on the same line, I cannot change yours without lowering their input as well. He paused, then shook his head. We must find some way to bring you back on a different line. You should not do it, though, until you have spoken to Sellers. I do not know what he plans for you, and you might not be able to enter the network again in time. Sellers. Rini tried to keep her voice calm. This man obviously preferred his conversations politely formal. Is he the one who summoned us, as you said? Yes, you will meet him soon, when the others arrive. Others? What? Martine cut her off. I will not enter the network again. Not if it means I must pass through the security system. Atasco inclined his head. I could bring you in as my guest, of course. I could have brought you all in as my guests and offered to do so, but Sellers was violently opposed to anything like that. It was something about the security system. You must speak to him about it, since I do not quite understand. What was that thing? Rini asked. That so-called security system killed a friend. For the first time, Atasco seemed truly shocked. What? What do you mean? Rini, with interpolations from Kabu and Martine, told him what had happened. By the time she was finished, Atasco had begun to pace. This is dreadful. Are you sure? Could he not simply have had an attack of the heart? Under stress, his English was a little more heavily accented, a little less precise. It had us all, Rini said evenly. Seeing said that it was alive, and I don't know how else you could describe it. What is it? It is the neural network, the thing that underlies the Grail network system. It was grown as the simulations were grown, I believe. I do not know much about it. That was not my role. But it was not meant to. That is terrible. If what you say is true, then Sellers is not a moment too soon. My God, terrible, terrible. Atasco had stopped pacing and now looked agitatedly around him. You must hear what he says. I will only confuse things. It seems he is right, though. We have lived in our own isolated world too long. Tell us about this place you have grown, said Martine. Rini was irritated. She wanted to hear more about this mysterious Sellers, about the thing that Kabu had named the All-Devourer, but it seemed Martine preferred a hobby lecture from a rich crank. She looked to Kabu for support, but he was giving Atasco a soulful and attentive look, particularly galling on the face of a baboon. She made a quiet noise of disgust. Temelun, their host brightened a little. Of course. You came from Arakataka, no? Down from the forests. Well, what did you think of the people you saw? Were they happy? Well fed? Rini shrugged. Yes, seemed to be. And not a word of Spanish. No priests. Well, a few these days from overseas, but they have trouble finding people to come to their strange and unfamiliar churches. But no Catholicism to speak of, and all because of horses. Rini looked at Kabu, who also looked confused. Horses? She asked. Oh, it is most elementary, my dear. What is your name? Rini hesitated. In for a penny? In for a pound, she decided. If he's faking this whole thing, these people are even farther out of our league than we guessed. And if the Grail Brotherhood could burn down her flat block and freeze Jeremiah's cred cards, her name wouldn't be news to anyone. Hayrin Sulaweo, Rini. Elementary, my dear Irene. Warming to what was obviously a favorite subject, Atasco seemed to have totally forgotten his earlier antipathy. Horses. The one thing the Americas lacked. You see, the ancestral horse died out here. Well, in the here, that is my real-life home, but not in the world of Temelun. When the great empires of the Americas arose in the real world, the Toltec, Aztec, Mayan, Inca, Aron Muisca, they had several handicaps the civilizations of the Tigris Valley or the Mediterranean did not have. Slower communications, no large wagons or sledges, since there were no animals capable of hauling them. Sorry, I lost my spot there. There were no animals capable of hauling them. Less need for broad, flat roads, hence less pressure to develop the wheel, and so on. He began pacing again, but this time with an air of happy energy.
In the real world, the Spanish came to the Americas and discovered them ripe for plucking. Only a few hundred men with guns and horses subjugated 2 continents. Think of that. So I built America again. But this time the horse did not die out.
He took off his feathered crown and set it on the table.
Everything was different here. In my invented world, Aztecs and others developed much broader empires, and after receiving trading visits from ancient Phoenicia, began reaching out down the sea roads to other civilizations. When gunpowder came from Asia into Western Europe and the Middle East, the boats of the Tlatoani, the Aztec emperor, if you will, brought it back to the Americas as well. But these people have cellular phones.
Against her better judgment, Rini found herself drawn into Atasco's fantasy.
How many years old is this civilization? This simulation is now only a little behind the real world. If there were an actual Europe on the far side of the ocean outside this palace, it would be experiencing the early part of the 21st century. But Christ and the Western calendar never came here. So even though the Aztec Empire fell long ago, we still call this day 4 movement, the fifth sun.
He smiled with childlike pleasure.
But that's what I don't understand. How could you have started back in the Ice Age or whatever, and now be in the present day? Are you trying to tell me you've been watching this thing for like 10,000 years?
Ah, I see.
Yes, I have.
Another self-satisfied smile.
But not all at regular speed. There is a macro level here where the centuries hurry past, and I can only gather data in large general clumps. But when I wish to really understand something, I can slow the simulation down to normal speed, or even stop it. You play God, in other words. But how could you create every one of these people? Kabu asked. Surely each one would take a long time.
He sounded quite convincingly interested. Rini at first thought he might be trying to prevent her from further antagonizing their host, but then she remembered the Bushman's own cherished goal.
You do not create separate individuals in a system like this, said Temaloon's God King. Not one at a time, anyway. This simulation and all the others in this entire network are grown. The units of life begin as simple automata, organisms with very basic rules. But the more they are allowed to interact, adapt, and evolve, the more complex they become.
His gesture encompassed himself and the other 3.
As is true with life itself. But when our automata get to a certain level of complexity, we can, as it were, file off the rough edges and have a sort of fractal seed for an artificial plant or animal, or even a human being, which will then grow as its own individual genetics and environment dictate. That's pretty much what they already do on the net, said Rini. All the big VR setups are based on data ecologies, one way or the other. Yes, but they do not have the power that we have.
He shook his head emphatically.
They do not have the potential for complexity, for sophisticated individuality. But you know this now, do you not? You have seen Temaloon. Is it not as true, as authentic in its variety as any place you have visited in the real world? You cannot accomplish that on the net, no matter how much money and effort you put in. The platform will not support it. Yes, but the security systems on the net don't kill people either.
Atasco's high-boned face flushed with fury, but it lasted only for a moment. Then a more doleful expression took its place.
I cannot defend it. I have spent so long watching the results, I fear I may have overlooked the price being paid. But what is this place, really? Is it an art project, a science experiment? What? All of those things, I suppose. Atasco broke off, staring over their shoulders. Excuse me for a moment. He walked past them around the table. The great doors at the chamber's far end had opened, and the guards were ushering through 3 more people. 2 of them wore female bodies, similar to Martine's, dark complected and black haired, like Temeloon's native inhabitants. The other was a very tall figure dressed from head to foot in extravagant, showy black. Feathers, ruffles, and long pointed boots gave this newcomer the silhouette of some ancient court dandy. A skull-tight black leather hood covered all of the stranger's head but for a bone-white, sexually ambiguous face with blood-red lips. Looks like someone out of some horrible Ganga drone band, Rini decided. Atasco greeted the new arrivals. Before he had finished, the apparition in black ostentatiously detached itself from the rest and sauntered to the room's far wall to examine the murals. Atasco showed the other 2 to chairs and returned to Rini and her friends. Temeloon is both science and art, I suppose, he continued as though the interruption had not happened. It is my life's work. I have always wondered what my native land would have been like if the Spaniards had not conquered. When I realized that for money, mere money, I could discover the answer, I did not hesitate. I have no children. My wife lives for the same dream. Have you met her? Rini shook her head, trying to keep up with him. Your wife? No. She's around here somewhere. She is the genius with numbers. I can perceive a pattern, guess at an explanation, but she is the one who will tell me the hard facts. How many bushels of rice have been sold in the Temeloon markets, or what effect the drought is having on population emigration to the countryside? Rini wanted to go and talk to the other guests, if guests was the right word, but she had belatedly realized that she could also learn things from Atasco for all his eccentricity. So you've made an entire world? I wouldn't think there were enough processors in the universe to do that, no matter what kind of fancy new network architecture you had. He raised his hand, graciously condescending to point out what should have been obvious. I have not created the entire world. Rather, what exists here, he spread his arms, is the center of a greater world that exists only as data. The Aztecs, the Toltecs, they were only information that influenced Temeloon in its growth. Although for a while there were real Aztec overlords here. He shook his head in fond remembrance. Even the Muiscas, who built the city during the height of their empire, largely existed outside the boundaries of the simulation. Their capital and greatest city was at Bogota, just as in the real world. He seemed to interpret Rini's look of general confusion as something specific. The Muiscas? You may know them as the Chibchas, but that is the name of the language, group, rather than the people. No? He sighed, a potter forced to work with faulty clay. In any case, there are less than 2 million humanoid instruments in the simulation, and the rest of the world in which Temeloon exists is only an extremely complicated system of algorithms without telemorphic representation. He frowned slightly. You said you came from Aracataca, did you not? That, you see, is very close to the northern border of the world, as one might say. Not that you would see the edge of the simulation. It is not so primitive. You would see the water, of course, and some illusion of country beyond. So all this network, this otherland, is made up of such places? Martine asked. The dreams and conceits of wealthy men? Atasco did not appear to take offense. I suppose, although I have not traveled outside my own domain very often. Not surprising when you consider how much of my blood and sweat I have put into this place. Some of the other domains are, well, I find them personally offensive. But as our homes should be bastions of privacy, so should our worlds. I would be very displeased if someone came to tell me here how to manage Temilun. Rini was watching the stranger in black, who was very pointedly not paying attention to anyone else. Was this someone who had been summoned as well as she had? Why? What was the point of people being gathered in the irritatingly self-centered Atasco's virtual kingdom? And who in hell was Sellers? Rini's pondering was interrupted by the doors thumping open to admit several more people. One appeared to be under police restraint, for a caped guard stood on either side of him. Excuse me. One appeared to be under police restraint, for a caped guard stood on either side of him. But after a moment, Rini saw that they were helping him to walk. He was tipped into a chair, where he slumped like a sick child. Odd, because he wore the impossibly well-muscled body of an Olympic gymnast. A smaller friend huddled beside him, offering what looked like words of encouragement. These two, and a third who wore a shiny robotic body, remained when the guards left. Bolivar Atasco left again to greet these latest arrivals. Rini stared at the newcomers. There was something naggingly familiar about the muscular black-haired Sim. As she turned to consult Kabu, she felt a gentle touch on her arm. One of the previous group of guests, a small, round woman in a Temaluni Sim, stood beside her. I am sorry to bother you. I am very confused. May I speak with you for a moment? Rini could not help looking the stranger over, but there was no way to deduce anything certain about anyone in VR. Of course. Sit down. She led the woman to the chair beside Martine's. I do not understand where I am. That man said we are in his simulation, but I have never seen a simulation like this. None of us have, Rini assured her. It's a whole new universe when you've got that kind of money, I guess. The newcomer shook her head. It is all so strange. I have been searching for help for my poor granddaughter and thought I had discovered a source of information about what had harmed her. I have worked so hard to learn the truth, but now, instead of finding information, I find myself in... I do not know what it is. Kabu popped up beside her. Is your granddaughter ill? He asked. Is she asleep and will not wake up? The woman drew back, although Rini thought it was more from the startling suddenness of his question than Kabu's simian form. Yes, she has been in the hospital. Been in hospital for many months. The cleverest specialists in Hong Kong do not know what the problem is. The same thing is wrong with my brother. Rini described what had happened to Stephen and how she and her friends had been led to Temalun. The woman listened avidly, making little noises of shock and unhappiness. I had thought I was the only one, she said. When my little dear one became sick, my flower, I felt sure it was something to do with the net. But my daughter and her husband, I think they believe I have lost my mind, although they are too kind to say so. Her shoulders trembled. Rini realized she was crying, although the Sim did not show tears. Forgive me. I have worried that I might indeed be going mad. She wiped at her eyes. Oh, I have intruded on you, but have not even told you my name. I am so impolite. My name is Quan Li. Rini introduced herself and her friends. We are as surprised by all this as you are. We thought were breaking into our enemy's personal playground. I suppose we did in a way, but this man, Atasco, doesn't seem very much like an enemy. She looked over at their host, who was talking to the black-clad stranger. Who is that with him? The one with the clown face. Did he come in with you? Quan Li nodded. I do not know him. I am not even sure it is I him. She giggled and lifted her hand to her mouth as though she had shocked herself. He was waiting outside when the guards brought us. Me and the other woman sitting there. She indicated the other Tamaluni Sim. I do not know her name either. We all entered together. Perhaps he is Sellers, Kabu suggested. He is not, said Martine distractedly. She was staring at the high ceiling, her eyes still without focus. He calls himself Sweet William. He is from England. Rini realized after a moment that her mouth was open. Even on a sim, that was not an attractive expression. She shut it. How do you know? Before Martine could answer, the sound of chairs being scraped against the stone floor made them all turn. Atasco had seated himself at the head of the long table, where he had been joined by a coldly beautiful Tamaluni woman dressed in a white cotton dress, her only ornament a magnificent necklace of blue stones. Rini had not seen her enter. She guessed it must be Atasco's number-crunching wife. Welcome to the Council Hall of Temilun. Atasco spread his arms in benediction as the rest of the guests seated themselves. I know you have come from many places and with many different purposes. I wish I had the leisure to speak with each one of you, but our time is short. Still, I hope you have had at least a brief opportunity to see something of this world. It has much to offer the interested sightseer. Oh, for God's sake, Rini murmured, get on with it. Atasco paused as though he had heard her, but his expression was puzzled rather than irritated. He turned and whispered something to his wife, who whispered back. I am not sure what to tell you, he said aloud. The one who summoned you should have been here by now. The shiny robotic sim Rini had noted earlier stood. Its excessively intricate armor had razor-sharp points everywhere. This far duppy, it said in contemptuous goggle-boy drawl. No clock for this. Flying now. It made a series of gestures with its chrome-gleaming fingers, then seemed taken aback when nothing happened. Before anyone else could say anything, a yellowish light flared brightly beside the Atascos. Several of the guests cried out in surprise. The figure that stood beside Bolivar Atasco when the flash subsided was a featureless humanoid splash of white, as though someone had ripped away the substance of the council chamber. Rini had been one of those who had shouted, but not because of the apparition's startling entrance. I've seen that thing before. In a dream? No, in that club, in Mr. J's. A memory that had been almost lost was coming back, her last feeble moments in the depths of that horrible club. This thing had helped her? It was all very fuzzy. She turned to Kabu for confirmation, but the bushman was watching the latest arrival with keen interest. Beside him, Martine looked completely overwhelmed, as though she were lost in a dark forest. Even Atasco seemed taken aback by the entrance. Oh, it's you, Sellers. The empty space at the top of the blank turned as it surveyed the room. So few, it said sadly. Rini felt the hair on her neck lift. She had indeed heard those high, almost feminine tones in the trophy garden at Mr. J's. We are so very few, it went on. Only 12 all told, including our hosts. But I am grateful that any are here at all. You must have many questions. We certainly do, the one Martine had called Sweet William interrupted. His accent was impossibly exaggerated, theatrical Northern English. Like, who the friggin' hell are you, and what the friggin' hell is going on here? The empty face showed nothing, but Renee thought she heard a smile in the soft voice. My name is Sellers, as Mr. Atasco has said. Like many of the rest of you, I am in hiding now, but that name at least is no longer a secret I need to keep. As to the rest of your question, young man, please watch what you call a body, Chuck. I will do my best to answer it, but it is not something I can do quickly. I ask for your patience. Asking's not getting, Sweet William said, but waved for Sellers to continue. Kabu, perhaps seeking a better vantage point, climbed up out of his chair and crouched on the tabletop beside Renee. I am something of an expert on the movement of data from place to place, Sellers began. Many people examine data for particular purposes. Financial market data to make money, meteorological data to predict weather, but because of my own interests, I have always tended to study the patterns themselves as phenomena rather than for what they represented. Renee felt Martine stiffen in the chair beside her, but she could see nothing but the same confused look on her companion's face. In fact, Sellers continued, at first my interest in the patterns that have brought us to this place today were almost purely observational. Just as a poet may examine the way water runs and splashes and pools without the practical interest of a plumber or physicist, I have long been fascinated with the way information itself moves, collects, and moves again. But even a poet may notice when the drain is blocked and the sink is beginning to overflow. I came to see that there were certain very large patterns of data flow that did not correspond to what I knew of the accepted map of the information sphere. What does all this have to do with us? Demanded the woman who had entered with Quan Li. Her English was blandly unaccented. Renee wondered if she was hearing the effects of translation software. Sellers paused. It is important that you understand my journey, or you will not understand the reasons for your own. Please, hear me out. After that, if you wish, you may walk away and never think of this again. You mean we're not prisoners? The woman asked. The blank space that was Sellers turned to Bolivar Atasco. Prisoners? What have you told them? Apparently some of the local police misunderstood my desire to have new arrivals brought here to the palace, the God King said hurriedly. I may have been a little unclear in my orders. What a surprise, said his wife. No, none of you are prisoners. Sellers was firm. I know it cannot have been easy for any of you to come here. Except me, chirped Sweet William, fanning himself with his black-gloved hand. Renee could not stand it any longer. Will you shut up? Why can't anyone here just listen? People are dead. Others are dying, and I want to hear what this Sellers has to say. She slapped her hand on the table and glared at Sweet William, who curled up in his chair like a wet spider, plumes and points quivering. You win, Amazon Queen, he said, eyes wide in mock horror. I'll shut me gob. It cannot have been easy for any of you to come here, Sellers repeated. It was certainly very difficult to gather you here, so I hope you will hear me out before making up your minds. He stopped and took a deep sighing breath. Renee was oddly touched. There was a living person behind the bizarre blank sim, somebody with fears and worries like anyone else. As I said, I noticed unexplained patterns in the virtual universe some call the datasphere. Excessive activity in certain areas, particularly in the wholesale accessing of technical libraries and the abrupt disappearance from their jobs of many top names in network and VR related technologies. I began to examine these events more closely. Money, too, left its own trails as stocks were sold unexpectedly, businesses suddenly liquidated, and other businesses founded. I discovered that, after a long research, most of these activities were being controlled by a single group of people, although they had shielded their transactions so well that only luck and a certain talent for pattern recognition allowed me to find them and learn their names. These people, wealthy and powerful men and women, were a consortium that called themselves the Grail Brotherhood. And that's where we're going to stop. Yes, because it's after 8 o'clock. So, I hope that the sound and everything was there. And meanwhile, I wish to you all a happy May Day. Happy Workers' Day. Happy whatever you want. Happy Maypole Day. Day after Walpurgisnacht. Whatever you want it to be. And I hope you have had a good one so far and that you will continue to have a good one for the rest of this evening or the rest of whatever day you're in, wherever you may be. I will be back next Sunday, again at 1 a.m. and 7 p.m. I very much appreciate your attendance. It makes it sound like a class. You're sharing some time with me. I hope you will take good care of yourself and others, and that you will continue to help out those around you, because that's the only way we're going to get through all of these things is together. So not just your friends and loved ones, but your neighbors, those around you. There's always somebody who needs some help. So again, thank you so much for joining me. I will see you next week. And until then, take good care of yourselves. Okay. Peace. Bye.